Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
Thanks for joining us this week. Now, this isn't a political podcast, but Adam and I do have a platform. It's not a very big one, but nonetheless, it is a platform. And we do believe that it is important to speak out against injustice and some of the things that we're seeing. So, the things that I've been seeing in this country, in the United States, especially in my neighboring state of Minnesota. Adam lives in Iowa. We're both Midwestern folks.
Minnesota's our neighbor too. So,
they've really been disturbing and heartbreaking, to say the least. As a veteran and as someone who at one point swore to defend the Constitution of the United States with my life, I'm seeing it trampled on and attacked in a lot of different ways. And I will say that, last week, watching some of the videos, I had that same dread that I had when I saw the planes hit the towers during 9/11, kind of seeing our country under attack. And that's really, to the point of that's how I'm feeling. And really, we wanted to kind of say something last week, but we already had a guest scheduled. So, we're using our platform this week to kind of talk about some stuff that might be important to information security in that regards. But I'll give Adam a moment to kind of reflect on his thoughts.
yeah, kind of the same thing you said, Andy, that hit my stomach feeling of where do we go from here and how do we put the pieces back together, because it feels like a certain safety or line that you felt like wouldn't be crossed was. I remember to your point, the two towers, being a senior in high school, sitting in, everyone remembers where they were. I was in AP psychology class, and being a naive 18-year-old, I thought, well, no one's going to attack American soil. And seeing that was very devastating. And seeing the government kind of acting against its own citizens was something I never thought I'd see either. And that's been really challenging to deal with, to say the least. And, I've seen people kind of dance around this. And I think you and I both believe pretty unequivocally that Renee Good and Alex Preety were murdered by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement or various Customs and Border Patrol, whatever division of Department of Homeland Security it was. Find that very disturbing, to say the least. Certainly, you can be frustrated, but you need to maintain your professionalism. And it was just completely ridiculous. And then the fact that, Andy, you started off saying this isn't a political show. Like, this shouldn't be a political thing. I think that's the hardest thing I have a challenge dealing with is I have loved ones in my own family who I have not brought this up with because I fear discovering they hold an opinion that is so difficult for me to reconcile with what I know people to be generally good, kind, warm people. And our political tribalism forces them to defend their team and actions that are really indefensible. And this should not be a political thing. And we're not going to go further about the specifics of those events on this show. What we're instead going to do is what we always do on this show. We talk about what are actionable things you can take forward to protect your rights as an American citizen, or maybe as a naturalized citizen, or someone else who has various levels of immigration status with the United States. You have rights. What are they, and how do you protect them? Because as we have seen, individual rights and liberties are not always being respected by our government and by some of the actors of that government today. And so we're just going to educate on what are your rights from a technology and privacy perspective, and how do you exercise those, especially through a technical lens. And so I think that's really topical and really timely. And it's a great time to unpack that now. So let's get to it.
Yeah. So information security, privacy, and often law are kind of not always the same thing, but there are definitely overlapping tenets and concerns, kind of like a Venn diagram where some things do overlap. And so Also, like I used to be law enforcement, so I understand case law, and it always is curious to me. It was always important that I understood what constitutional rights were so that I didn't violate them when I came in contact with citizens. And so, what we wanted to talk about today is really your cell phone, which is really important, right? Like we all carry cell phones. And so, what is your right when it comes to your cell phones and kind of keeping your privacy as well as unreasonable search and seizure if you are detained or come in contact with law enforcement. So I don't have to obviously like state the obvious. We have a lot of personal information on our cell phones, and many of us use biometrics to unlock it. And it's kind of a gray area. And actually, I went and reviewed some of the case law that has happened because it has changed. It has always been asserted by the Supreme Court that you cannot compel, force someone to give up their password or PIN because that is considered testimony, and you cannot be compelled to testify against yourself per the Fifth Amendment. And so you cannot force someone, like obviously you've seen the movies, I plead the fifth, right? Like that's essentially it. Like you cannot be compelled to testify against yourself because you are saying your password or saying your PIN. That is considered testimony in court. And you cannot compel someone to do that. I can't force you to do that. But however, we always thought that biometrics was different. There is now new case law, and it's kind of laying the groundwork. The Supreme Court hasn't ruled on it, but there is case law in the DC circuit courts as well as the DC appellate courts where the FBI actually forced a defendant to force his thumb on his phone to unlock his cell phone. Not like spoofing it or anything, but actually forcing his physical thumb on the phone to unlock it. And it ended up revealing a bunch of incriminating texts. And the defendant argued that this was unconstitutional and the evidence should be inadmissible in court. This was actually a January 6th defendant. And so that was part of the whole trial. And because that was part of the trial, he said, I'm gonna fight this. And the DC court that he brought the suit to ruled in favor of the prosecution and said, no, biometrics do not violate your Fifth Amendment, right? And so, we're gonna still continue and admit that evidence. And he appealed, and the United States Court of Appeals of the District of Columbia sided with the defendant, overturning the decision of the lower court, saying that it did violate the Fifth Amendment. It violated his constitutional right. And just to, we're talking about the Fifth Amendment. So what is the Fifth Amendment? It protects people, and most importantly, it's everyone, not just citizens, because it reads, no person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, kind of in short. And that, again, it extends to statements, physical acts that are considered testimony, whether it explicitly or implicitly relate to a factual assertion or disclosure of information. And so in theory, this ruling could apply to other forms of biometric security because, it was just thumb. So it could be like Face ID, facial recognition. But it's important to say that the DC Circuit, the appellate court, emphasized that the reliance on the fact of this particular case that is unconstitutional, but it may vary from case to case. And that's just kind of how like case law works. Like you have one ruling and now someone else has to bring another suit and you have precedent for this suit in this decision. And you could say, hey, what about this? And at a certain point, the Supreme Court would have to be involved and kind of rule over everything because it's in the DC Circuit Court, DC Appellate Court, does not relate to other appellate courts or other circuit courts. So,
yeah, especially the Supreme Court tends to get involved when you have conflict in how various appeals courts are handling these rulings. And that's effectively what the Supreme Court really is. It is the highest appeals court, is how it functions in practice. And so when you get inconsistent rulings, now one could look at this and it emphasized, this circuit court, appellate court emphasized that it's relying on the facts of this particular case. You could argue, and any good attorney would, that forcing someone's thumb onto a device is very different than holding a phone up in front of their face and not forcing them to take any sort of action or behavior. Physically forcing me onto my phone is very different. And so it would be very possible to imagine a future in which perhaps, physical touch-based biometrics could be considered also testimonial in nature. Maybe going back to what you were talking about, it extending to physical acts. The Fifth Amendment does. Whereas putting a phone in someone's face and not forcing them to take any physical act or action could still be allowed. So we could even see not all biometrics treated the same in the future as well, which is also an interesting thing to consider.
Yeah, and also, I was thinking about when I was law enforcement. Like there are times when physical acts do not count towards your Fifth Amendment right, and one of those is like blood draws. So if you were to get into a drunk driving, accident or something like that, or get pulled over for a DUI or whatever, they may ask for a blood draw. You can consent to that, and if you consent, obviously they're going to draw your blood. But if you say no, the only way to do that is to actually get a judicial warrant. So you can get a warrant to do the blood draw, but you can't force someone to do it. Like you can't just like take their blood. But if a judge signs off on it, then yes, you can do it. So, there are exceptions and kind of like different case laws around that. And so like maybe with a judicial warrant, you might be able to force someone's thumb onto it and whatnot. So, and why is this important? Is mainly because like you need to understand what your rights are and how like law enforcement can interact with your devices if you come in contact, you're detained, or you're arrested by law enforcement. What are your rights to your electronic device, which is essentially our life, like in a little computer, right? Like
The most
everything.
personal of personal computers.
Yep. And so obviously, it's complicated with the biometrics. And so if you want to be 100% sure, there are a couple recommendations that we have here, especially if you're like in Minnesota or you're in a city where, stuff is happening, and you're like using your phone and have a higher chance of maybe coming in contact. Number one, you can just remove biometrics completely. Like just use your PIN. That is 100% sure. And if they ask you for your PIN, you can say no. It's protected under your constitutional rights. On the iPhone, there's also like a shortcut. You
Hmm.
can hold down the power button and the volume button, and if you hold that down long enough, like even in your pocket, you should feel like a little vibrate.
Hmm.
And so when you do that, it immediately will ask you. Well, actually, it like shows you the power screen, right? Like to slide to
Slide to power off.
to power off. But if you just cancel, it will force you to put in your PIN the next time you open up your screen. On
So
Android,
you can, by the way, you can do that in your pocket without even pulling your iPhone out. You can just get in the habit of, I may be about to cross a border or have an interaction with a law enforcement person, or I'm going through a checkpoint or whatever. You can just reach in your pocket, hold those two buttons till you feel the haptic. And at that point, your iPhone is completely like thrown away all of the keys that it needs to do biometric unlock until you successfully unlock it with your passcode or your PIN, at which point biometrics become re-enabled till you do that again. So it's a one-time deal. When you do that, it forgets basically the biometrics temporarily until you complete a PIN or passcode based unlock. It will also, by the way, none of your notifications will be unlocked on your home screen as well. It's the same behavior as when you first power on an iPhone that have been powered off. It's exactly like that, how it's not in like a fully unlocked state, and it doesn't have access to the keychain. It doesn't have access to a lot of cryptographic information. So it's a very locked down state until you complete that PIN unlock.
yeah, and that's a good point too. This is really good for iPhone or Android users is kind of go through your notifications and see what is available on your screen pre-unlock, right? Like previews of things or even just after it's been unlocked, like what's available, right? Like I only have a very limited amount of notifications. Nothing shows up if I haven't unlocked the phone either with biometrics or with my PIN. Nothing. And then once I unlock it, I can see different notifications for specific apps that I want to see, like Teams or Outlook or whatever.
Which is good practice anyway, just to stop getting distracted all the time. Notifications are so disruptive. So
Yep,
it's a productivity tip as well.
absolutely. On Android, there's something called lockdown mode, which is don't confuse that with Apple's lockdown mode. Totally different thing, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But on Android, just go into the settings, look up lockdown mode, and there is a shortcut for that. It's the same concept as the Apple of holding down the power button. Like pressing the power button 5 times on an Android phone will trigger it. It's also on the unlock screen, like when you swipe down and see kind of your command center and You can hit lockdown and it'll lock down. And then that will force you to type in your PIN the next time. And again, like, I was thinking, like, if you're like one of those people who are actually trying to go out there and record, you're going to have your phone probably unlocked or something like that. So again, the best way to do it is to have the passcode just automatically be the only thing and no biometrics.
iPhones can record while they're locked. So you don't have to
That's a good
unlock it to
point.
record. Yeah.
That's a good point. And I also saw this really interesting kind of tip from someone on social media as I was watching some things about this. He set up his facial recognition by like kind of blowing up his face, like he would like
Blow air into
like
his cheeks.
yeah, like blow air, like almost like he had like he had a mouthful of nuts, right? Like you got the cheeks and everything. So he blows out his cheeks, blows out his lips, and then that's what he set his iPhone up. And so if you just hold up your facial recognition to that face, it's nothing. He has to actually physically change his face in order to unlock the
That's a
phone.
clever one.
Yeah, I thought it was super clever. So that way you don't have to disable it and you just have to actually modify your face in order to unlock it. So I thought that was actually a really good tip as well. Now, these are all kind of like tips of whether or not you get kind of in this particular instance, like ICE and customs and border, like inside the United States, law enforcement in general, if you get stopped, these are kind of like your rights. When you enter the United States at customs and enforcement and customs and immigration, that's a different level of like rights that you have. So we'll just talk about that really quick because when you're coming in like on an international flight and you're going through customs and immigration, you're at the border of the United States. And so that there are different rights for people there. Now, customs and immigration do have the right to search any electronics that you have. They have that right. If you give them your phone and you consent to the search, put it in airplane mode because they're supposed to not to be able to search anything that's online. So they're like able to search things that are local on your phone, not connected to the internet, but they're not supposed to be able to search like your Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, right? Although there have been some reports of that, just know that that's not within their purview, technically speaking. You don't have to share your PIN, you don't have to share your password, you don't have to, unlock the phone. You can actually say no. Like as a US citizen, or really anyone can say no, but as a US citizen, you can say no, and they cannot deny you entry as long as you have a valid passport and you're in good standing and all that, you don't have a warrant. They cannot deny you entry into your country. So, but if you say no, they could take your phone away. So they could take it and they could try to crack it. And you might not get it back for months. So there are some consequences there. If you are a green card holder, you're supposed to have the same rights as a US citizen. But if you've been out of the US for 6 months, they may force you to like reapply for your green card. You can't get your green card revoked unless you have a hearing before an immigration judge. So same thing, they can't really deny you entry, if you just went out for like 2 weeks and you came back, but again, they could take your phone away. Now, if you have a visa, that's where you have the least amount of protection. So if you have a tourist visa or you have a student visa, they can deny you entry if you refuse. And they probably, in this day and age, probably will deny you entry. So, a couple things. One, I would say if this is something that you're concerned with, take a burner phone, and don't connect to any of your accounts. Just use it for internet. You can like log into your accounts like via the internet, just browser or whatever, not in the apps. Also, like anything that can trigger like a wipe. Like my phone automatically wipes if they enter in the passcode 10 times wrong. So I have everything backed up to iCloud. If they wipe it, no big deal. So those are just a couple of tips I have.
Also, there is a thing called Global Entry, which is available, and it's a trusted traveler program. It also gets you TSA PreCheck that's included with the service as well. And if you have Global Entry, it's practically you don't break stride re-entering the United States. You can actually do it on the plane through an app. Now, you don't even have to go to the kiosk, but if you still like going to the kiosk, you literally step in front of it. And before you can really even stand still, it does use facial recognition, confirms your face, and you just walk straight on through. And so it's one of those ways, just by basically going through a little bit more of a process, paying some money, having an interview. It's kind of a hassle to get set up, but once you've set it up, it does it's not a guarantee, right? They still have the right to question you if they want to, but it just makes you kind of uninteresting effectively and low risk. And for the most part, it can be a shortcut to pass through those border crossings. And if you haven't done that, one other call out is you can do what's called mobile passport control, which is a different app, but it's also basically something you complete on the plane once you land at, say, Atlanta or Newark or wherever, and also as an expedited entry. And so those are ways just to avoid scrutiny and just kind of pass back in the United States quicker and get through those border crossings with less stress and less scrutiny as well. So those are a couple of tips there to take advantage of, especially if you're eligible to use them. Do highly recommend Global Entry. It's a great experience, and has someone who's landed in Atlanta and seen like an hour and a half long line and been able to just walk right on through. It's a beautiful thing. So that can also be a tip. Not that it feels great to say the answer is go do more paperwork, go hand over more information, go enroll in more programs, but ultimately a little bit now to save a lot later is potentially another avenue as well, where you can kind of go through this during cooler heads and cooler times, and then you just, you're in all the right programs, you have all the right paperwork, and it just, you're less likely to get flagged. So that's another option as well.
And so, everything that we talked about here was really like initial contact and part of your Fifth Amendment rights as any persons within the United States. Now, if law enforcement has a judicial warrant, now that becomes kind of different. We talked about whether or not later cases could force someone to put their fingerprint on. But if they have judicial warrant, well, they can subpoena like Google and Apple for your email, your text messages, like, your Verizon, or if you're using SMS, obviously all of that is out in the open. It's not encrypted. And so all of that can be subpoenaed if you haven't backed it up with encryption, right? And so with Apple, we talked about that lockdown mode. That's really, and I don't think there's something available on Android, but on Apple, you can encrypt your iCloud backups because
That's
by
advanced
default,
data protection. That's what that's called.
Advanced data protection. Thank you. And so that it's not on by default, but if Apple if I were to get my iCloud data subpoenaed, all they'd get is an encrypted blob. Same thing like we've talked obviously on this show a lot. You can go back and look at some of our other shows that we've talked about for encrypted chat apps. And we've talked about encryption for email, but like Signal, iMessage, those are all end-to-end encrypted. Proton Mail is end-to-end encrypted. Proton doesn't have the keys. They have gotten subpoenaed before by the United States, and they've handed over, encrypted blobs. So, with modern day supercomputers, it would still take, thousands of years to crack the encryption on these blobs. So, if that's something that concerns you, you have end-to-end encryption, obviously, for those types of information. All right. Well, this was hopefully you learned something, and we always want to have people take away actionable things. So check your settings, make sure that you know your rights if something were to happen, and yeah, that's our show for this week. Thanks for listening and watching. As always, our contact information will be in the show notes if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.